So today we're going to take a look at Cather's, one of ours, parts 2 and 3. All right, we have seen in part 1 that Claude is a restless soul. He is hungry for greatness, and he's desirous of something to serve. Such a character, such a soul as Claude, could be understood as longing for a completion that is not of this world. He's longing for something that he will not get while he's here on earth. That he could not find community with others at all here and now. That is, there's something very Christian about Claude's longing. Longing to be whole in an imperfect world. And all such things that could fill him up with meaning, whether it be family or marriage or friendship, would always be plagued by the limits of community, by our inability to genuinely enter into the lives of others. This seems to be Hemingway's position. No genuine community is possible because human beings die and are destined to die. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that Cather in Claude gives us everything that Hemingway gives us in his characters. Characters longing for completion and unable to find it. Wanderers, searchers, those who are alienated. This is part of my argument that Hemingway has nothing on Cather. She understands everything that he understands, but she understands it better. Against this idea that human beings are fundamentally alienated, we see in part 1 a contrary idea. And that idea is the idea of martyrdom. Martyrdom is the idea that there are things outside of human life that are worth living for and worth dying for. Claude does his undergraduate thesis on martyrs, among the most famous of which is, of course, Joan of Arc. And this shows Claude has an attraction to martyrs. He wants to serve something outside of himself. He seems to be, early on in this book, a man without faith. But he is a man without faith because the faith that is presented to him is altogether worldly or self-serving. That is, the examples of lives of faith are entirely worldly. Brother Weldon. And the church that he observes in America is not a church of martyrs. It is a church of comfortable self-preservation. It is a church of Americanism or American values. The church that Claude observes is all about prohibition or anti-smoking crusades, the experimental breeding of chickens, sanitation, and so on. It is not altogether, or even primarily, that is, the church that Claude observes is not altogether or even primarily a church of sin and grace and redemption and longing for completion in God. There is no church in America to which Claude might be attracted. And it is with this spiritual emptiness and baggage that Claude makes big decisions about his life in parts 2 and 3. Parts 2 and 3 are, in a sense, the moments of decision for Claude. In part 2, he chooses marriage with Enid, a marriage that ends in misery and loneliness, as everyone seemed to think it would. Part 3 sees Claude filling the gap that could have been filled with a successful marriage with something else. And that something else is a firm belief and commitment to fight with the Allies in the war to end all wars, World War I. Part 3 sees Claude losing himself in something outside himself, World War I. What I'm trying to say here, once again, to develop the contrast between Hemingway and Cather, Cather does something that Hemingway doesn't do. She takes the idea of the life of faith seriously. Seriously enough to give it some treatment. And provides what I think could be seen as an internal critique of American Christianity. American Christianity is not about spiritual longing, but rather about morals. And hence, American Christianity is not satisfactory to those with genuine spiritual longing. This is not a critique of Christianity as such. It's a critique of Christianity as practiced in America, or as understood by Americans. Hemingway, thinking that all such institutions are just charades, gives no serious treatment of lives of faith. Cather does. And one could almost see in her novel, one of ours, a defense of Christianity against America and America's practice of it. But more on that later. So once again, to summarize what we've looked at so far in Cather, there seem to be 4 main contenders for Claude's allegiance. That is, he longs for something to serve outside of himself. And I'm not saying he window shops during the first 4, or during the first few parts of the book, but he pursues 4 different legitimate, long-standing avenues for fulfillment. As we saw last time, the first one is liberal education at the university. The study of lives and events that happened outside of him is for Claude exciting, draws his attention, seems to be something he could spend his time and life doing. But liberal education is no longer strong enough in America, and he is forced to reject it because of his father's commercial enterprises and his allegiance to his own family. He abandons the university and returns home to the Prairie. As we also saw last time, Christian faith is rejected by Claude because it was unmanly as practiced in America. It is about morality, not spiritual longing and completion. It is about goodness, not faithfulness. Brother Weldon is the typical American Christian, not Joan of Arc. And as we intimated last time, Claude seems to reject a third possibility, a life of commercial greatness, such as that pursued by his brother Bayless. Now, Claude worries that he is being excessively adolescent about this, that he is manifesting what he calls an adolescent contempt for money. filthy lucre. Perhaps you know people like this. People who don't want to bring up money or think money is no object because they don't want to be seen as concerned with such low things as how much you owe me. But Claude's contempt for the commercial life is more than that. What Claude finds, and what is perhaps indeed true, is that the deepest human longings are not for money or lucre, but rather are spiritual or intellectual. And commercial life makes an easy error. Money is a means, not an end. It's an important means. But money is only important if it serves higher ends. That is, the ends of intellectual and spiritual longing. The problem with the money culture is that it reduces morality and longings to what are commercially useful, or some variant of that. So while Claude might engage in commerce, that's not what's going to butter his bread. That's not where his final longings and desires lie. And as we close part one, Claude began to pursue a fourth option. That is, the fourth idea, besides liberal education, faith, commercial greatness, that might satisfy Claude is marriage. And that is our topic for today, marriage. We will see that marriage is not the answer for Claude. Though it has promise as an answer, and maybe it could have been a good answer. We know this for sure. The marriage to Enid is not the answer. But as we mentioned last time, perhaps marriage to Gladys Farmer would have been the answer to Claude. This is the sense I think we are left with after reading Cather's book. We will explore this during today's talk. Our question is, does Cather reject marriage? Or is her rejection of marriage to Enid, and hence a part of a rejection to Enid's character and Enid's faith? What does she reject, marriage or Enid? I will try to answer that yes. And then after talking about marriage, I'm trying to give you a preview right now. I'm talking about marriage for a bit. We will see that a commitment to the Allied cause gives Claude's life an external thing to fight for and live for and perhaps die for. It is the closest thing that Claude can find to martyrdom in the modern setting, dying for one's country instead of dying for one's faith. I'm not saying that this is an adequate answer, but it seems to be Claude's answer. And in fact, I will eventually argue, this will be more next lecture, that Cather knows Claude's answer is not right, is not sufficient. Claude is not Cather in a way that you think Jake Barnes is probably Hemingway. Claude is not Cather. She has certain criticisms of Claude that she puts forward through this book. But first we're going to try to understand Claude, and then we're going to try to find what's wrong with him or why he's misguided. So once again, let me put a bow on this. Here's what we're doing today. Claude embraces marriage to Enid, but it is altogether unsatisfactory. He therefore embraces the Allied cause. That's what happens in part 2. You know, you summarize part 2 in a couple sentences. There you go. He marries Enid. His marriage stinks. He joins the army. We need to see why he marries Enid, why he would think that that is satisfactory, and then why it isn't. And then we will see why he embraces the Allied cause, and eventually, next time, we will pursue the problems that the embrace of the Allies cause causes for Claude. That's what parts 4 and 5 are about. We good? Let's talk about why marriage might be a good thing. And I suppose it's a little pitiful that we have to talk about this, but let's talk about this. Why might marriage be a good thing? Claude seems to be for marriage, right? He thinks it's a good idea. And when he sits back and reflects on what marriage might mean, he tells us the following things. This is on page 122 in part 2, or book 2, part 4, right near the end of part 4. So if you go to part 5, you'll see right before the end of part 5, that last paragraph. The middle of that paragraph, here's what Claude says when thinking about what marriage might mean with Enid. I don't know how many of you have gotten married or thought about it. This might be a way of thinking about it that it's actually quite profitable. When he was with her, he thought how she was to be the one who would put him right with the world and make him fit into the life about him. He had troubled his mother and disappointed his father. His marriage would be the first natural, dutiful, expected thing he had ever done. It was the beginning of usefulness and content. And his mother's oft-repeated psalm said it would restore his soul. Enid's willingness to listen to him, he could scarcely doubt. Her devotion to him during his illness was probably regarded by his friends as the equivalent to an engagement. Let's just turn to one other page, page 145. It's in the same section. There's the part of the book. This is in part 10. It's about halfway through part 10, but I'm just going to read one sentence. You need not find it. He believed in the transforming power of marriage, as his mother believed in the miraculous effects of conversion. So his mother, Evangeline, is the Christian of the novel, believes in the power of conversion. Claude, not a believer, believes that marriage has much the same conversion power as conversion. It's going to transform him into a new being. Now why? Why is Claude attracted to marriage? Why does he think it has this transforming power? Remember once again his attraction to martyrdom. And yes, I'm going to talk about how martyrdom and marriage are similar things. Martyrdom is when you completely give up yourself, that is, your life, to a cause outside of yourself. Marriage is about love. And genuine love is giving yourself completely to another and becoming one with that other. That is, marriage is making something outside of yourself. I know I'm old-fashioned and I'm even old. The question that you ask yourself upon thinking about marriage is, would you die for her? If the answer is yes, consider marriage. If the answer is no, next. Martyrdom is the idea that you serve something outside of yourself and are willing to die for it. So is marriage. So it is no coincidence that someone attracted to marriage or martyrdom would be attracted to marriage. I'm sure I could do some sort of etymology to show that they are rooted in the same word. a spouse of one's choosing is surely one of the best and sturdiest ways of serving something outside of yourself, and perhaps even achieving happiness. It would be the first natural, dutiful thing he'd ever done. He'd studied martyrdom, now he would live it. Human beings desire. We are desiring creatures. And we desire that our hearts would be filled. It is reasonable to think, and I just want you to know, I think this actually happens, that marital love and its consequences fill the heart and satisfy the soul. And this seems to be what Claude has in mind when he enters marriage with Enid. Call him a hopeless romantic. Now, why does he think, so what I'm trying to say right there, let's put a very fine point on it, it is not crazy to think that marriage would be something to satisfy someone. That is, marriage is an actual contender on the list of human goods. It can make you happy. And I don't think Cather ever calls into question what I just said. That is, I think that that might actually be her understanding. But then, it's a question of application. To whom should one get married? And here's where Claude, as I said before, makes a blunder. He marries Enid. Let's talk about why. Why Enid? The interesting or nice thing about Enid is that she is unconventional. She doesn't fit in. Yet she is very confident and loving. When Claude's face is mangled by wire, she comes daily to nurse him. Someone who could nurse like that, that's not an unwifely character, and one might look for that in a husband too. Someone who, when you're sick and mangled and ugly, will sit next to you and play chess and help nurse you to health. That's what she is. It's not crazy to think of that even as an engagement. And if that's all you know about her, wife material. She drives a car uncommonly well. Did you guys notice that? They go to the big city together. She takes over for Claude. She knows how to handle that thing up and down the slopes and the muddy streets. Well, that shows her confidence and competence. She's got it all together. When one looks for a wife, having it all together, something you might consider. You don't want to say, wow, she's got confidence issues. You want someone who loves you, will nurse you, and is confident in her own character. That she is unconventional is all to the good. So is Claude. Doesn't fit in. She is also very spiritual. I think Cather says about her, something on her face resembled early Christian. What does that mean? Someone interested in martyrdom. Someone interested in serving something outside herself. I know that in one of the discussion sections where we were talking about Hemingway, one of the students, I can't remember who it was talking about how it's difficult to know what's going on inside of people's heads in books. That's actually not true. A competent author will tell you what's going on inside of the character's head in how they describe the character. That is, the external is a reflection of the internal. And the way she looks, early Christian, that's the way she is. That's the way Cather treats it, I think. She wants to serve something outside of herself, and all of this endears her to Claude. Okay, they look like and appear to be soulmates, each fitted for marriage. So what I'm trying to say is, marriage could satisfy someone like Claude, and Enid has some of the attributes that one would look for in a wife. Nevertheless, there is an impending doom that surrounds that marriage from the very beginning. When Claude begins to say, I'm thinking about hooking up with, or not, he wouldn't say hooking up, I'm thinking about proposing to Enid, no one thinks it's a good idea. He asks her dad, he's like, are you sure you want to do that? Does Enid say yes excitedly? No. When everyone finds out, they all kind of start warning Claude about the mistake he's making. She seems like she could be good, but there is a problem in Enid. Let's talk about what it is. We begin to see the problem with Enid on the wedding night. This is a bad sign in a book. There's several rules that I have about reading novels. One of them is if a character kills an animal gratuitously, it's a bad character. So there's a wonderful book of Cather's A Lost Lady. There's a character, Ivy Peters, who grabs a hummingbird and slits its eyes. So the hummingbird is now blind and then lets go. He does this as a little child. And just so you know, he's the bad guy of the novel.
No kidding.
Right? There's another example of this in Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, where the Jodes are sitting there waiting for a ride, and some truck comes through, and he sees a turtle in the middle of the road, and he swerves to hit it. Bad guys. Like when you gratuitous violence to animals, bad. I'm not saying hunting is bad. That's not gratuitous. That's bad. Well, here's another bad sign. When you will not consummate your marriage on the wedding night. Bad sign. But that is the fate of Enid and Claude. Claude seems to be in the mood. Enid has a headache. And similar things happen really throughout the whole period of them building their home. They build a beautiful master bedroom. And what is Enid's attitude toward it? I can't wait to have some guests so we can let them sleep in this room. And Claude's like, hey, no. We have this room for a reason. Right? It's apart from the rest of the house. Clayberry white. So this shows, first of all, that Enid is not physical. Can we agree on that? She's not physical. She doesn't think people should enjoy bodily pleasures. One of them, I am told, having no experience in this matter, is sex. We see that she's a fanatic. We talked about this last time when it comes to the experimental breeding of chickens. She doesn't want chickens to have bodily pleasure either. She's dedicated, of course, to prohibition. No pleasure of the drink. Eventually, we see that Enid simply leaves Claude. She leaves Claude, she leaves Nebraska, she sets sail to China to go care for her sister, who happens to be a missionary there in China. She's worried about how the people of China will think if her sister is not cared for by her family. Enid has no longings herself, and she seeks to suppress the longings that others might have, including the chickens. Cather says of Enid, this is at the beginning of book 3, but very, very close to the beginning of book 3 in part 2. I'm just going to read one quick line. She disliked ardor of any kind. In other words, she was without passion. without longing. The marriage that Claude enters into is excessively spiritual, with no basis in the body. Enid loves humanity, but not any particular human beings. And this ultimately sets Claude up against Enid. I'm going to try to put a very fine point on this, and then we'll talk about what this means. Enid loves humanity, but not human beings. And whatever it is that moves her has no basis in human life. It doesn't grow out of anything that one normally observes. Enid doesn't seem to be discontent. She doesn't seem to be upset with any excessive spiritual longing or intellectual longing. She's against longing. She's anti-longing. Claude, in contrast, is defined by longing. He longs for something outside of him. And he sees that that longing grows out of his normal experience. He pursues this, it doesn't satisfy. He pursues that, it doesn't satisfy. He pursues 3, it doesn't satisfy. He continues to pursue things, none of them satisfy him. So he finds that he is defined by a certain kind of longing. She is without it. And when he realizes that she is without longing, on the bottom of 172 for those with the favorite numbering, here is his reaction. This is near the beginning of part 3. Part 3 is called Sunrise on the Prairie, which sounds like good, right? Sunrise on the Prairie, the beginning of a new day. Here's how the book essentially begins. Claude used to lie there and watch the clouds, saying to himself, "It's the end of everything for me." Other men than he must have been disappointed, and he wondered how they bore through it a lifetime. Claude had been a well-behaved boy because he was an idealist. He had looked forward to being wonderfully happy in love and deserving to his happiness. He had never dreamed that it might be otherwise. Somehow, now, when he went out into the fields on the bright summer morning, it seemed to him that nature not only smiled, but laughed at him. He suffered in his pride, but even more in his ideals, in his vague sense of what was beautiful. Enid could make his life hideous to him without ever knowing it. At such times he hated himself for accepting at all her grudging hospitality. He was wronging something in himself. It's not a good thought when your thought of marriage is, well, I'll die soon. Although I have friends who've told me that. It's only one life, you know. It's like, oh, it's only 70 years. It's like, yeah, but, you know, it's your only 70 years. Anyways. She is the wet blanket of his life. But it's something, once again, I think this is related ultimately to Enid's being such a Christian. But it's the opposite problem of Christianity. So we saw earlier that the problem of Christianity in America is it is excessively moral and this-worldly. The problem of Enid is that she is excessively otherworldly, or abstracted from normal human concerns. Somehow, a proper Christianity must take cognizance of the spiritual longings in human beings and how those normal longings grow out of normal human life. Enid reflects the problem of not acknowledging normal human life. Most American Christianity takes part of the problem of being excessively worldly. Now, as we talked about last time, this analysis, broadly, that Cather is pro-marriage but anti-Enid, gives rise to a tantalizing possibility, which is that Gladys could have satisfied Claude. That is, if Claude had married Gladys, things could have turned out differently. What do we know about Gladys Farmer? Well, we could take a look at a couple places in the book here. I'm just going to talk about the favored numbering, and I'm not going to dawdle on each of these quotations, and it's just going to be, I'll tell you what part they're in. End of part 8 in section 2. Here's what she has to say about Gladys. She, Gladys, had her own cursed kind of sensibility. She would expect too much from life and be disappointed. He was reluctant to lead her out of the chilly evening without some word of entreaty. He would willingly have prolonged their passage through many rooms and corridors. Perhaps, had that been possible, the strength in him would have found what it was seeking. Even in this short interval it had stirred and made itself felt, had utterly a confused appeal. Claude was greatly surprised at himself. So she too is worried about life never answering her hopes. She is certainly a well-wisher of Claude's. She wants everything to go well for Claude. To go back a few pages, this is on page 129. Here's what